Sammy Hemingway had always been drawn to forgotten places. At 32, she'd made a modest living as a freelance photographer, capturing the beauty of decay, abandoned factories, crumbling mansions, and derelict churches that dotted the Appalachian landscape. But on that crisp October morning in 2024, she found herself at a county auction in the tiny mountain town of Blackridge, West Virginia, population 847. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The auction was being held in the parking lot of the town hall, a squat brick building that had seen better days. Sammy had driven 3 hours from Charleston on a whim, following a tip from an old college friend who knew about her obsession with abandoned structures. "And they're selling off county properties for pennies," he'd told her. "Tax liens, foreclosures, the whole 9 yards." She clutched a lukewarm coffee as the auctioneer, a portly man with a voice like gravel, worked through the lots. Most were parcels of land nobody wanted, rocky hillsides, flood-prone bottomland, and landlocked acres with no road access. The crowd was sparse, a handful of local developers, some curious retirees, and Sammy. "Lot 17, the auctioneer announced, consulting his clipboard. "The old Blackridge station. Grain depot built 1887, abandoned since 1962. Buyer takes it as is, where is. Minimum bid 50 cents. 50 cents. Sammy's heart quickened. She'd driven past the station on her way into town, a grand Victorian structure with a distinctive octagonal tower, its red brick facade weathered but still proud against the mountain backdrop. The railway line had been defunct for decades, torn up and sold for scrap, but the building remained, standing sentinel over an overgrown platform. "Do I hear 50 cents? The auctioneer's tone suggested he expected no bids at all. Sammy's hand shot up before she could think better of it. 50 cents to the young lady in the back. "Do I hear 75 cents? Silence. A few people turned to look at her with expressions ranging from amusement to pity. One old-timer shook his head slowly. "Going once. Going twice. Sold for 50 cents to bidder number 43. Just like that, Sammy Hemingway became the owner of a 5,000-square-foot Victorian train station. As she filled out the paperwork and handed over 2 quarters to the county clerk, who couldn't quite hide her smirk, Sammy wondered if she'd just made the best or worst decision of her life. "You know that place is probably full of asbestos and lead paint, right?" the clerk said, stamping the deed. "And you'll be responsible for any environmental cleanup. The county's been trying to get rid of it for years." "I know," Sammy said, though she hadn't really thought about any of that. "I just want to photograph it. Document it before it falls down completely." The clerk handed her an old brass key that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Good luck, honey. You're gonna need it." Sammy drove straight to the station, her new deed sitting on the passenger seat like a talisman. Up close, the building was even more magnificent than she'd imagined. The octagonal tower rose 3 stories, topped with a weathered copper cupola that had oxidized to a brilliant green. Arched windows, most with glass still intact, marched along the facade. The wooden platform was rotted and dangerous, but the brick structure itself seemed solid. The brass key turned smoothly in the lock, and the heavy oak door swung inward with a prolonged creak that echoed through the cavernous waiting room. Sammy stepped inside, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. The interior was a time capsule. Wooden benches, carved with the initials of long-dead travelers, lined the walls. An ornate ticket window, its brass bars tarnished green, still bore a sign reading, "Next train 3:45. A massive pendulum clock on the wall had stopped at 11:17, frozen in some forgotten moment. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that streamed through the tall windows, illuminating a floor of black and white hexagonal tiles, many cracked but mostly intact. Sammy walked slowly through the space, her footsteps echoing. She ran her fingers along the ticket counter, disturbing decades of dust. Behind it, cubbyholes still held yellowed papers and ancient ledgers. A calendar from 1962 hung on the wall, forever displaying May, but it was the tower that called to her. A narrow staircase spiraled upward, and despite the warning voice in her head about structural integrity, Sammy began to climb. The stairs groaned but held. The second floor had been offices. She could see desks still in place, filing cabinets with drawers hanging open, their contents spilled and scattered. The third floor was smaller, just a single room in the tower itself, and there, in the corner of that uppermost room, partially hidden behind a fallen beam and a pile of old railway schedules, was a safe. It was a magnificent piece of Victorian engineering, black iron with gold scrollwork, about 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. The manufacturer's plate read, Herring Hall Marvin Safe Covers, New York, 1885. The door was secured with a combination lock and 2 massive handles. Sammy knelt before it, her photographer's eye appreciating the craftsmanship even as her mind raced. Why would there be a safe in an abandoned train station? What could possibly be inside after 60 years? She tried the handles knowing they wouldn't budge. They didn't. The safe was locked tight, keeping its secrets. As the sun began to set, painting the waiting room below in shades of amber and gold, Sammy sat on the dusty floor of the tower room, staring at the safe. She'd bought this place on a whim for 50 cents, expecting nothing more than some good photographs, and maybe a few interesting stories. She had no idea that the safe before her contained $6 million, or that opening it would change everything. Sammy didn't sleep that night. She'd driven back to her rented room at the Blackridge Motor Lodge, a depressing strip of cabins that smelled of mildew and decades of cigarette smoke, but her mind remained in that tower room with the safe. She lay on the lumpy bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, running through possibilities. What were the odds that a safe in an abandoned train station contained anything valuable? Probably zero. It had likely been emptied when the station closed in 1962, or broken into by vandals at some point over the past 60 years. Or perhaps it had never held anything important to begin with, just old paperwork, railway schedules, employee records. But then why lock it? Why leave such an expensive safe behind? By 5 a.m., she gave up on sleep and drove to the only place in Blackridge open at that hour, Millie's Diner, a chrome-sided establishment that looked like it had rolled in from 1955 and decided to stay. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and the waitress, a woman in her 70s with hair dyed an improbable shade of red, filled Sammy's cup with a knowing smile. "You're the girl who bought the station," she said. It wasn't a question. Sammy shouldn't have been surprised. In a town of 847 people, news traveled faster than light. "Guilty. I'm Millie. Owned this place 40 years. She slid into the booth across from Sammy uninvited. "That station's been sitting empty since before you were born. What are you planning to do with it?" "Honestly? I'm not sure. I'm a photographer. I was just going to document it." Sammy hesitated, then decided to trust her instincts. "I found a safe in the tower room yesterday. Big Victorian thing, locked." Millie's eyes lit up. "No kidding? Well, that's interesting. You know anything about it?" "Not directly. But I know someone who might." Millie stood, her joints creaking. "Finish your coffee. We're taking a field trip." 20 minutes later, Sammy found herself being led up the porch steps of a pristine white Victorian house on Blackridge's main street. Millie knocked with the confidence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. The man who answered was ancient, 90 if he was a day. But his eyes were sharp and clear. "Millie, and you've brought a friend. Harold, this is Sammy Hemingway." "She bought the old station yesterday." Harold's eyebrows rose. "Did she now? Come in, come in." His living room was a museum of Blackridge history. Photographs covered every wall, the town in its heyday when the railway brought prosperity and purpose. The station appeared in dozens of them, busy with travellers. The platform crowded with people and luggage. "I was the last station master," Harold said, settling into a leather armchair with the care of someone whose bones argued with gravity. "Worked there from 1955 until we closed in 62. Best job I ever had, and the worst day of my life when they shut us down." Sammy leaned forward. "There's a safe in the tower room. Do you know anything about it?" Harold's expression grew distant, traveling backward through the decades. The safe. Yes, I remember it. It was there when I started, already old then. The previous station master, Edgar Pritchard, he's the one who used it. But by my time, we kept the daily receipts in a lockbox at the bank. That old safe. Edgar was the only one who knew the combination. What happened to Edgar? Died in 1954, heart attack right there in the ticket office. I started a few months after. Harold shook his head. We tried to get into that safe when I took over, actually. Company sent a locksmith all the way from Pittsburgh, but the man couldn't crack it. Said it would take drilling, and the railway didn't want to pay for that. Figured whatever was inside wasn't worth the expense of opening it. Sammy felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. So nobody's been in it since 1954. Earlier than that, probably. Edgar was. Well, he was an odd bird. Very private. Lived alone, never married. He ran that station like it was a fortress. After he died, we found all sorts of peculiar things in his desk. Old maps, newspaper clippings about train robberies, letters written in some kind of code. Train robberies. Sammy's photographer's instinct for a story tingled. Harold struggled to his feet and moved to a bookshelf, pulling down a leather-bound scrapbook. He flipped through pages of yellowed newspaper clippings until he found what he was looking for. Here, the Blackridge station robbery of 1923. The headline screamed across the brittle page. Bold daylight robbery nets $50,000 from railway express car. Sammy read quickly. On August 14th, 1923, armed men had held up a train that stopped at Blackridge station. They'd made off with a strongbox from the express car containing $50,000 in cash, a fortune at the time. The robbers were never caught. The money was never recovered. Edgar was just a clerk at the station when that happened, Harold said. But he became obsessed with it, spent years trying to figure out who did it, where the money went. Drove himself half crazy with it, Sammy's mind raced. You don't think that Edgar found the money, or was involved somehow? Harold shrugged. I've wondered. He lived very modestly, but then again, so did most of us back then. When he died, there was nothing unusual in his estate. Just a few $1,000s, which was respectable enough for a station master. But the safe, Millie interjected. If he was the only one with the combination, and he died before anyone could open it, then whatever he wanted to keep secret, Sammy finished, is still in there. Harold handed her the scrapbook. Take this. There are more clippings about the robbery. If you do manage to get that safe open, I'd love to know what's inside. I've been wondering for 70 years. As Sammy walked back to her car, the scrapbook under her arm felt heavy with possibility. $50,000 in 1923 would be worth, what she did quick math in her head. Adjusting for inflation, maybe $700,000 or $800,000 today. More than enough reason for a station master to keep a very big secret. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than a century-old robbery. Something about the way Harold had looked at those newspaper clippings, the way his voice had changed when talking about Edgar Pritchard. Whatever was in that safe, it had been waiting a long time to be found, and Sammy Hemingway was determined to be the one who found it, finding a locksmith, willing to tackle a Victorian-era safe in an abandoned train station. Proved harder than Sammy expected. The first three she called laughed and hung up. The fourth, a gruff-voiced man named Pete in Charleston, at least listened to her full explanation before declining. Lady, those old Herring Hall Marvin safes are works of art. Also, they're damn near impossible to crack without the combination. You'd need a specialist, and specialists charge specialist prices. How much are we talking? For a safe that old? Could be $5,000 just to look at it. 10 or 15 to actually open it, assuming they can. And that's if you can find someone willing to make the drive to the middle of nowhere. Sammy did the math in her head. Between her savings and what she could scrape together from her credit cards, she had maybe $8,000. Barely enough, and it would wipe her out completely. She was sitting in the station's waiting room, the autumn sun streaming through the tall windows, when her phone rang. Unknown number. Is this the woman who bought the old Blackridge station? The voice was female, older, with a distinctive Appalachian accent. "Yes, this is Sammy Hemingway. This is Agnes Pritchard. Harold Cummings called me. Said you found Edgar's safe." Sammy's pulse quickened. "Pritchard. Are you related to Edgar Pritchard?" "He was my uncle." "My father's brother. I'm probably the last living relative who remembers him." Agnes paused. "I think I can help you open that safe." 20 minutes later, Agnes Pritchard pulled up in an ancient Buick that looked like it had survived several wars. She emerged slowly, a tiny woman in her late 80s, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. But her eyes were sharp as she surveyed the station. "Hasn't changed much," she said. "I used to come here as a girl. Uncle Edgar would let me sit in the ticket office and pretend to sell tickets." She smiled at the memory. "He was good to me, even if everyone else thought he was strange." Sammy led her inside and up the tower stairs, moving slowly to accommodate Agnes's pace. The old woman paused on each landing, touching the walls, lost in memory. In the tower room, Agnes stood before the safe for a long moment, saying nothing. Then she reached out and placed her palm flat against the iron door, like greeting an old friend. "Uncle Edgar used to let me sit on his lap while he opened this," she said softly. "I was maybe 6 years old. He made a game of it, said he was teaching me to remember numbers, made me repeat them back to him over and over." Sammy's heart hammered. "Do you remember the combination?" "Child, I'm 87 years old. I can barely remember what I had for breakfast." Agnes smiled. "But the funny thing about childhood, memories, sometimes they stick when newer ones don't. Edgar made me practice that. Combination, like it was my multiplication tables." She knelt before the safe with surprising grace, her fingers hovering over the dial. "It was a pattern, see? He said the numbers told a story. 32 right. That's how old he was when he started at the station. 14 left, his badge number. 61 right. The year the station opened, 1861. Agnes began to turn the dial, her movements slow and deliberate. Then it reversed. 61 left. 14 right. 32 left. She grasped the handle and pulled. Nothing happened. "I was so sure," Agnes whispered, her disappointment palpable. "Wait," Sammy said. "You said the station opened in 1861? But Harold told me it was built in 1887. Agnes frowned. "No, dear. The current building is from 1887, but there was an older station here before that. Simpler thing, wooden. Burned down in the winter of 86. Edgar started working at the original station in 1892. He would have been," she calculated in her head, 32. "His badge number was 14, and the new station opened in 87, not 61. She reset the dial and began again, this time with new numbers. The 32 right, 14 left, 87 right. Then back, 87 left, 14 right, 32 left. The handle turned with a deep, satisfying clunk. Both women froze. Sammy found she was holding her breath. "Well," Agnes said, her voice shaking slightly. "After all these years, together they pulled the heavy door open. The hinges protested but gave way, and the interior of the safe was revealed. It was packed with bundles wrapped in oilcloth, stacked neatly from top to bottom. Sammy reached for the nearest one with trembling hands and unwrapped it carefully. Money. Stacks and stacks of old bills. She saw 20s, 50s, hundreds, all from the 1920s and 30s, their designs archaic to modern eyes. "Dear God," Agnes breathed. They pulled out bundle after bundle. Old currency, gold certificates, silver certificates, bills that hadn't been in circulation for nearly a century. And beneath the money, leather-bound ledgers filled with meticulous handwriting. Sammy opened one of the ledgers at random. The entries were dated 1923, starting in August. Each page detailed amounts, dates, and cryptic notes transferred from secondary location. Original sequence maintained. Awaiting statute of limitations. "He found it," Sammy said, understanding dawning. "Edgar found the money from the 1923 robbery, but he didn't turn it in. He hid it." Agnes had tears streaming down her face. "He was waiting. The statute of limitations for robbery was, 20 years? 30? He was going to wait until it was legal to keep it, and then he died in 1954, Sammy finished. Just before he could claim it, they spent the next hour carefully removing everything from the safe and laying it out on the floor. Sammy photographed each bundle, each ledger page, documenting everything. When they were done, they sat back and stared at the fortune before them. "We need to count it," Sammy said. "And we need a lawyer, maybe several lawyers," Agnes nodded, still looking dazed. "Uncle Edgar. He spent his whole life guarding this secret, waiting for the day he could use it, and he never got the chance. What do you think he would have done with it?" Agnes picked up one of the ledgers, flipping to the last entries. Edgar's handwriting grew shakier toward the end, the writing of a man who knew his time was running short. The final entry, dated 3 days before his death, read, "If found after my passing, let this money finally do some good. Build something. Help someone. Don't let it gather dust forever like I did." Sammy and Agnes looked at each other across the piles of century-old cash. "We need to figure out exactly how much is here," Sammy said. "And what it's actually worth today." Neither of them could have guessed that the answer would be $6 million, or that claiming it would prove almost as complicated as finding it. They worked through the night, spreading the contents of the safe across the waiting room floor. Sammy had driven to the nearest town with a proper store and returned with LED lanterns, latex gloves, plastic storage containers, and a portable scanner. Agnes had called her grandson, Michael, a CPA from Beckley, who arrived around midnight with a money counter and an expression of profound disbelief. "Grandma, you can't be serious," he kept saying, even as his fingers flew over his calculator. The bills were sorted by denomination and era. Most were from the early 1920s, the original robbery haul. But there were also bills from the 1930s and 40s, suggesting Edgar had added to the cash over the years, probably hiding his own savings alongside the stolen money. "This doesn't make sense," Michael said around 2 in the morning, running another stack through the counter. "If this was the 50,000 from the 1923 robbery, even accounting for what Edgar might have added, we should be seeing maybe 60 or 70,000 total. But this," he gestured at the neat stacks of sorted bills, "this is way more." Sammy was reading through the ledgers, Edgar's meticulous accounting painting a picture of obsession and patience. "He invested it," she said, looking up from a page dated 1925. "Or rather, he had someone else invest it for him. Look at this. Payments to someone named J. Whitmore, regular withdrawals and deposits." Agnes leaned over her shoulder. "Jerome Whitmore. He was a banker in Charleston. Died in the 50s, I think. He and Edgar were friends from the war. The first war, I mean. Edgar was laundering the money through his friend," Sammy said, following the entries. "Small amounts at a time, invested in stocks, bonds, real estate. He turned 50,000 into..." She flipped forward through the pages, watching the amounts grow year by year. My God. By 1953, the year before he died, the total value was listed as over $300,000. Michael whistled low. 300,000 in 1953 money. With inflation and investment growth over 70 years, he pulled out his phone and started calculating. Conservative estimate, if that money had been properly invested and left to grow, we could be looking at anywhere from $5 to $10 million in today's value. The room fell silent except for the hum of the money counter. "But it wasn't invested," Sammy said quietly. "It's been sitting in a safe for 70 years. The bills themselves are worth something," Michael said. "Old currency, especially in good condition, has collector value. And some of these," he held up a gold certificate, examining it under the light, "these can be worth significantly more than face value." They counted until dawn broke over the mountains, turning the sky above Blackridge from black to purple to pink. The final tally was staggering, $847,000 in face value, but Michael estimated the collector value, given the age and condition of the bills, could be 3 to 4 times that amount. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We need to get this to a proper appraiser, he said. Someone who specializes in rare currency. And we need a very secure place to store it. I'm not comfortable leaving this here. We also need to figure out the legal situation, Agnes added. She'd been quiet for the last hour, looking increasingly worried. This was stolen money originally. What's the statute of limitations on a 1923 robbery? Sammy had been wondering the same thing. She'd Googled it on her phone around 3 a.m. In West Virginia, the statute of limitations for theft was 5 years in the 1920s. Long expired. But that didn't necessarily mean the money was free and clear. The railroad, she said, the original owners, they might have a claim, or their successors might. Michael shook his head. The railway company that operated this line went bankrupt in 1955 and was absorbed by C&O Railway, which then merged with Chessie System, which became part of CSX. Good luck figuring out who actually has standing to make a claim. Plus, they'd have to prove this is the specific money from that robbery. And after 70 years, there's also the question of Edgar's estate, Agnes said. If this legally belonged to him when he died, and I'm not saying it did, but if a court decided it did, then it would have passed to his heirs. Which would be, she paused, thinking. My father died in 1978. I'm the last living heir of that generation. It might actually belong to me. And you sold the station to Sammy for 50 cents, Michael pointed out. What was in the station could be considered part of the property transfer. Sammy's head was spinning. So we have potentially stolen money that may or may not be legally claimable by a railway company that may or may not still exist. That was hidden by a man who died 70 years ago, possibly left to his heirs. One of whom sold the property where it was found without knowing it was there. She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. We need lawyers. Probably teams of lawyers. First, Michael said, standing and stretching, his back cracking audibly, we need to secure this. Then we need to document everything properly. Then we bring in legal counsel. He looked at his grandmother. This could take years to sort out, Grandma. You understand that? Agnes smiled, the expression both sad and amused. I'm 87 years old. I've got nothing but time. As the sun climbed higher, they began the process of carefully packing everything back into the plastic containers. Sammy photographed each bundle again, maintaining the chain of custody. They made lists, cross-referenced the ledgers, created spreadsheets. By noon, they had everything loaded into Michael's SUV. He was driving it straight to a safety deposit box at a bank in Charleston, while Sammy and Agnes began the search for legal representation. But before Michael left, Agnes placed her hand on his arm. Whatever happens with this money, she said firmly, we honor Edgar's last wish. We do something good with it. Build something. Help someone, Michael nodded. I promise, Grandma. Sammy watched the SUV disappear down the mountain road, carrying $6 million in century-old bills and the weight of a dead man's dream. Then she turned back to look at the station, her station. He bought for 50 cents and wondered what on earth she'd gotten herself into. The answer would prove to be far more complicated than she could have imagined. Finding a lawyer proved easier than expected, but not for the reasons Sammy hoped. 3 days after counting the money, she received a call from a law firm in Charleston. Blackwell, Morris & Chen, attorneys at law. They'd read about her discovery. I'm sorry, what? Sammy said into her phone. How did you read about it? We haven't told anyone. Miss Hemingway, you're in Blackridge. Population 847. You think 3 people can spend all night in that station with lights blazing and cars parked outside without the whole town knowing? The voice on the other end belonged to Jennifer Chen, senior partner. The story's already in the local paper. Local woman finds fortune in old train station. You're famous. Sammy grabbed her laptop and Googled. Sure enough, there it was. The Blackridge Gazette had run the story that morning. Someone had leaked it. Probably someone who'd seen Michael loading containers into his SUV, or Millie at the diner, or any of a dozen people who'd noticed unusual activity at the station. We're interested in representing you, Chen continued. Pro bono, actually. This case has some fascinating legal angles, and quite frankly, it would be excellent publicity for the firm. pro bono. Sammy was immediately suspicious. Why would you work for free on a case involving millions of dollars? Because you can't afford us otherwise, and because if we win, we'll negotiate a percentage of the recovery rather than hourly fees. If we lose, we've still got a landmark case for the law journals. Either way, we come out ahead. Chen's honesty was disarming. Plus, between you and me, I grew up in Blackridge. That station was a landmark of my childhood. I'd like to see something good come of this. Sammy met with Jennifer. Chen 2 days later at the firm's offices in Charleston, a sleek glass tower that seemed to belong to a different world than the mountains around Blackridge. Chen was in her early 40s, impeccably dressed, with the sharp-eyed look of someone who missed nothing. "Let's talk about the legal landscape," Chen said, spreading documents across the conference table. "First, the good news. The statute of limitations on the original 1923 robbery has long since expired. No criminal liability for possession of the money. But that doesn't mean it's automatically yours." She ticked off points on her fingers. 1. The original owner, the railway company, might have successor entities that could claim the money as stolen property. We're researching that. 2. Edgar Pritchard's estate. If the money legally became his, and that's a big if, then it should have passed to his heirs through probate. Since it didn't, we might need to reopen his estate. "That's where Agnes comes in," Sammy said. "Exactly. Mrs. Pritchard is the sole surviving heir. If a court determines the money belonged to Edgar and should have been distributed as part of his estate, it would go to her." "But," Chen held up a hand, "she sold you the property containing the money. So there's a question of whether the contents of the safe transferred with the property. I paid 50 cents for a building. I didn't know there was money in it, which works in your favor, actually. Courts generally rule that hidden items found in purchased property belong to the buyer, not the seller, under the doctrine of treasure trove. But this isn't exactly buried pirate gold. This was in a safe that was part of the building's fixtures." Sammy's head was starting to hurt. "So who does the money belong to?" Chen smiled. "That's what we're going to argue about for the next year or two. But here's my professional opinion. I think you and Mrs. Pritchard have the strongest claim, possibly as co-owners. The railway company's claim is weak. Too much time has passed, too many corporate changes, and they'd have to prove this specific money was stolen from them. Edgar's estate is trickier, but the fact that he clearly intended the money to be found and used for good works in his favor. What about taxes? That's the fun part." Chen's expression suggested her definition of fun differed from most people's. "If this is classified as found property, it's taxable as income at fair market value. If it's inheritance, there might be estate tax implications. If it's recovered stolen property, well, that's murkier. We'll need tax attorneys involved too. How much are we talking? Depends on how it's classified. Could be anywhere from 30 to 50% of the value." Sammy did quick math. Even at the low end, that was nearly $2 million in taxes. So we could end up with $3 million after taxes, split between me and Agnes. Approximately. Maybe more if we can argue for favorable tax treatment. Maybe less if the railway company or other claimants get a piece. Chen leaned forward. "But here's what you need to understand. This is going to be a long, messy process. There will be court hearings, appeals, negotiations. The media attention will be intense. Your life is about to get very complicated. I bought a train station for 50 cents, Sammy said dryly. "I think my life is already complicated," Chen laughed. "Fair point. So are you in? Do you want us to represent you?" Sammy thought about it. She thought about Agnes, about Harold's curiosity, about Edgar Pritchard spending his life guarding a secret he never got to use. She thought about his final ledger entry, build something, help someone. "On one condition," Sammy said. "Whatever we end up with, whatever the final amount is after all the legal fees and taxes and settlements, I want to use it the way Edgar intended. To do something good for Blackridge. To build something." Chen's smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I have some ideas." Over the next 2 hours, they mapped out a legal strategy. Chen would file a declaratory judgment action, essentially asking the court to determine who owned the money. They'd notify all potential claimants, the railway successor companies, Edgar's estate, anyone else who might have a claim. They'd bring in tax attorneys, appraisers, historians. This is going to be national news, Chen warned as Sammy was leaving. Are you ready for that? Sammy thought about her quiet life as a photographer, documenting forgotten places in obscurity. All of that was about to end. Ready or not, she said, the story hit the national news that evening. By morning, Sammy's phone was ringing off the hook. Her email inbox was overflowing, and there were reporters camped outside the Blackridge Motor Lodge. Her 50-cent investment was about to cost her everything she'd ever known, but it might also give her the chance to build something that would last. Sammy woke to the sound of voices outside her motel room. Lots of voices. She pulled back the curtain and immediately regretted it. Camera flashes exploded like strobe lights. At least a dozen news vans crowded the parking lot of the Blackridge Motor Lodge. Their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like strange mechanical flowers. Ms. Hemingway, can we get a statement? Sammy! How does it feel to be a millionaire? Is it true you only paid 50 cents? She let the curtain fall and sat on the edge of the bed, her heart pounding. This was insane. It had been less than 24 hours since Jennifer Chen filed the declaratory judgment action, and already the story had exploded. She checked her phone. 247 missed calls, 1,183 emails, and her social media accounts had been discovered and were now flooded with messages from strangers. Someone knocked on the door. "Day, Ms. Hemingway? This is Millie from the diner. I brought you breakfast. These vultures won't let me through, but I'm sliding it under the door." Sammy opened the door a crack and pulled Millie inside, slamming it shut before the reporters could surge forward. Millie stood there holding a grease-spotted paper bag and grinning. "You're famous, honey. They've been here since dawn. Got 3 different morning shows out there, CNN, Fox News, and I don't even know who else." Millie set the bag on the table. "Also, the mayor wants to see you, and the town council, and about 50 other people." "I don't know what to tell them," Sammy said, sitting down heavily. "I don't even know what's going to happen with the money yet. That's not what they want to talk about." Millie's expression grew serious. "Blackridge has been dying for 40 years, Sammy, ever since the railway closed and the mines shut down. This is the most attention this town has gotten since Kennedy came through here in 1960. People are hoping. Well, they're hoping this might mean something." The weight of those hopes settled on Sammy's shoulders like a physical thing. She spent the morning dodging reporters and talking to Jennifer Chen, who had news. CSX Corporation, the current incarnation of the railway that had operated through Blackridge, had filed a claim to the money. So had a man named Robert Caldwell, claiming to be a descendant of one of the 1923 robbery victims, apparently his great-grandfather, had been a passenger on the train and lost a substantial amount of personal money in the heist. "Caldwell's claim is weak," Chen said over the phone. "He can't prove his great-grandfather's money was specifically in that strongbox. But CSX is a different story. They've got deep pockets and good lawyers. This just got more complicated. By afternoon, Sammy couldn't take being trapped in the motel anymore. She slipped out the back window, feeling ridiculous like an actual criminal, and made her way on foot to the train station. The reporters hadn't discovered it yet. They were all camped at the motel and at Agnes's house. The station was peaceful, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, dust motes dancing in the air. Sammy climbed the tower stairs and sat in the room where the safe stood open and empty, looking out over Blackridge. From up here, she could see the whole town spread out below, the main street with its struggling businesses, the closed-up storefronts with faded signs, the houses with sagging porches and patched roofs. Beyond that, the mountains rose in layers of blue and green, ancient and indifferent to human struggles. Her phone buzzed. Another news outlet requesting an interview. She ignored it. What would Edgar Pritchard do? He'd spent his whole life guarding this secret, watching this money grow, planning for something that never came. Had he looked out this same window, imagining what could be? Footsteps on the stairs pulled her from her thoughts. Harold Cummings emerged, breathing hard from the climb, carrying a worn cardboard box. "Figured I'd find you here," he said. settling down beside her with a groan. Hiding from the circus? Something like that. Can't say I blame you. Town's gone crazy. Half the people want you canonized, the other half think you're some kind of thief. He set the box between them. I brought you something. Been meaning to give it to you anyway, but with all this happening, seemed like the right time. Inside the box were more of Edgar's belongings, things Harold had kept from the station when it closed. More ledgers, personal letters, a diary. I saved these when we cleaned out his office after he died. Couldn't bring myself to throw them away. He didn't have any family to give them to, or so we thought, before Agnes came forward. Sammy pulled out the diary, its leather cover cracked with age. The entries were sporadic, sometimes weeks or months apart. But one entry dated Christmas Eve 1940 caught her eye. 17 years since I found it. 17 years of waiting, of watching the calendar, of hoping. The money sits in the safe, growing useless with time, while the town around me struggles. Sometimes I wonder if I'm a fool, if I should have turned it in immediately, let the chips fall where they may. But the law said it was theft, and I could not bring myself to profit from theft even indirectly. So I wait for the law to change, for time to make it clean. And I plan. When I can finally use it, when it's legal, I will build something here. A library, perhaps, or a school. Something that will outlast me. Something that will make the waiting worth it. Sammy felt tears sting her eyes. He waited so long, 24 years, Harold said. Would have made it if his heart hadn't given out. He looked at her. You know what I think? I think you're Edgar's second chance. The universe gave him a do-over. Sent someone young enough to see it through. I'm not trying to be anyone's second chance. I just wanted to take some photographs. Harold laughed, the sound echoing in the empty tower. Life's funny that way. You set out to do one small thing, and it becomes something else entirely. They sat in silence for a while, watching the shadows lengthen across Blackridge. Finally, Harold spoke again. The mayor's going to ask you to commit to using the money for the town, you know. Before the court case is even settled, he's going to want promises. I can't promise anything yet. It might not even be mine to give, I know. And you shouldn't promise. But you should think about what you want. Because whatever happens with the legal stuff, you're part of this town now. You bought the station. Edgar's legacy is yours in a way. So you need to decide, are you going to cut and run when this gets too hard, or are you going to stay and build something? It was the question Sammy had been avoiding since she found the money. The easy path would be to settle with all the claimants, take whatever portion she could get, and disappear back to her quiet life. But every time she thought about walking away, she remembered Edgar's words. Build something. Help someone, I don't know, she said honestly. Ask me again when I'm not being chased by news vans. Harold smiled and struggled to his feet. Fair enough, but don't wait too long to decide. The town's watching. They need hope, Sammy. They need to believe something good can still happen here. After he left, Sammy stayed in the tower as darkness fell over Blackridge. Below, the town's lights began to flicker on, small and defiant against the night. Her phone buzzed constantly, the world demanding her attention, demanding answers she didn't have. But for now, in this quiet space where Edgar had kept his secret for so long, she let herself imagine. Not just what the money could buy, but what it could mean, what it could build. Tomorrow she'd face the reporters, the lawyers, the claimants. Tomorrow she'd start the long fight to determine who owned $6 million in century-old bills. But tonight, she let herself dream the same dream Edgar had dreamed, of a town brought back to life, of something good rising from something secret, of hope built on a foundation of time and patience. The safe stood empty in the corner, its door hanging open like a question waiting to be answered. The conference room at Blackwell, Morris and Chen was packed. Jennifer Chen sat at the head of the table with Sammy on her right and Agnes Pritchard on her left. Across from them sat a formidable array of lawyers representing various claimants to the money. First was the CSX Corporation team. 3 attorneys in identical Navy suits who looked like they'd been manufactured in the same efficient factory. Their lead counsel, a sharp-featured woman named Patricia Vance, had already submitted a 40-page brief arguing that the money belonged to CSX as the successor to the original railway company. Next to them sat Robert Caldwell's attorney, a solo practitioner from Kentucky named Jim Howell, who looked rumpled and outgunned. Caldwell himself was there too, a thin man in his 60s with nervous energy and a manila folder full of what he claimed was evidence of his great-grandfather's loss. Then there was the surprise claimant. The state of West Virginia itself, represented by an assistant attorney general. The state argued that under treasure trove law, any found property of significant value potentially belonged to the state, especially when discovered on property bought at a county tax auction. Finally, sitting slightly apart from the others, was a lawyer representing the Blackridge Historical Society, a non-profit that had formed approximately 48 hours after news of the discovery broke. They claimed the money should be preserved as a historical artifact and administered as a public trust for the benefit of the town. "This should be fun," Chen muttered to Sammy as everyone settled in. The meeting began with Patricia Vance. "Let's cut through the emotion and look at the facts," she said crisply. In 1923, $50,000 was stolen from a train operated by the C&O Railway. That money was never recovered. CSX is the corporate successor to C&O. This money, by all accounts, is likely the same money that was stolen. Therefore, it belongs to CSX, by all accounts? Chen challenged. "Can you prove this specific money came from that specific robbery? After 100 years? The timing aligns perfectly. The amount, accounting for what Mr. Pritchard apparently added, is consistent. The location is exactly where the robbery occurred. The burden of proof is on those claiming the money to show it's not stolen property." Jim Howell, Caldwell's attorney, jumped in. "My client's great-grandfather, Thomas Caldwell, was a passenger on that train. He was carrying $1,200 in cash, his life savings, which was stolen in the robbery. The railway company's insurance only covered the company's losses, not the passengers. Thomas Caldwell died in poverty in 1931, directly because of that theft. My client believes he has a moral claim, if not a legal one, to a portion of this money. Moral claims don't hold up in court," Vance said dismissively. "They do in the court of public opinion," Howell shot back. "And last I checked, this case is going to be decided by a judge who lives in this state and reads the newspapers." The Assistant Attorney General cleared her throat. "The state's position is straightforward. West Virginia law regarding treasure trove is clear. Significant found property belongs to the state unless the finder can prove legal ownership. Ms. Hemingway cannot prove ownership. Therefore, the money should be turned over to the state for proper administration." "You mean proper taxation?" Chen said dryly. "We mean proper oversight. $6 million is too significant to simply hand over to someone who paid 50 cents at a questionable auction." "The auction was legal and proper," Chen countered. "The county had every right to sell the property. My client has a clear deed to the building, not to hidden contents of unknown provenance." Agnes, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Her voice was soft but carried clearly in the room. "My Uncle Edgar spent his entire life guarding this money. He wrote in his diary that he was waiting for the statute of limitations to expire so he could legally claim it. He died before that could happen. As his sole surviving heir, I believe I have the strongest claim to his intentions, if not his property." "Mrs. Pritchard," Vance said, her tone gentler but still firm, "your uncle was in possession of stolen property. He may have convinced himself he was doing something noble by waiting, but legally, stolen property doesn't become legitimate simply because time passes. You can't inherit stolen goods." "Actually," Chen interjected, "that's not entirely accurate. The statute of limitations on the original theft has expired. There's no criminal liability. Whether the money remains civil property of the railway company is a separate question. And after 100 years of corporate changes, mergers and bankruptcies, proving a direct chain of ownership is going to be nearly impossible for CSX. The lawyer for the Blackridge Historical Society, a young woman named Sarah Preston, finally spoke. "All of these arguments miss the point. Edgar Pritchard's final written intention was clear. He wanted this money to benefit the town. Not individuals, not corporations, not the state. The town. The Historical Society proposes acting as trustee for the funds, administering them for community benefit exactly as Mr. Pritchard intended. Your Historical Society didn't exist a week ago, Vance pointed out. It exists now, and it's a registered 501c3, perfectly capable of administering funds for public benefit. Sammy had been listening to all of this, feeling increasingly frustrated. These lawyers were arguing about the money like it was an abstract concept, a legal puzzle to be solved. They seemed to have forgotten that real people were involved, that a real town was watching, hoping. "Can I say something?" she asked. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at her. "I'm just a photographer," Sammy said. "I bought that station because I thought it was beautiful and I wanted to document it before it fell down. I didn't expect to find anything. I certainly didn't expect all of this." She gestured at the room full of lawyers. "But here's what I do know. Edgar Pritchard wanted this money to help Blackridge. That was his dying wish. My great legal claim, or Agnes's inheritance rights, or CSX's corporate succession, none of that matters as much as honoring what Edgar wanted. With respect." "Ms. Hemingway," Vance said, "legal claims are exactly what matter in a court of law." "Then maybe we shouldn't let a court decide," Sammy said. The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but once said, she realized she meant them. "Maybe we should settle this ourselves, all of us. Figure out an agreement that honors Edgar's wishes and recognizes everyone's claims." Chen looked at her sharply. "Sammy, that's actually not a terrible idea," Jim Howell said slowly. "Litigation could take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. By the time it's done, there might not be much left to fight over." The Assistant Attorney General frowned. "The state doesn't typically negotiate away its claims, but you could," Agnes said. "If the settlement included provisions that benefit West Virginia, serve the public good, and create jobs and economic development, that's worth more to the state than a protracted court battle, isn't it?" A long silence followed. Sammy could almost see the lawyers' minds working, calculating angles and advantages. Finally, Patricia Vance spoke. "CSX would consider a settlement if it's structured properly. We're not interested in bleeding the town dry or looking like corporate villains in the press. But we need to protect our shareholders' interests." "Give us 2 weeks," Chen said. "Let me work with all of you to draft a proposal. Something creative that addresses everyone's concerns and honors Edgar Pritchard's intentions." One by one, the lawyers nodded agreement. Even the Assistant Attorney General, after a long pause, gave a cautious nod. As the meeting broke up, Chen pulled Sammy aside. "That was either brilliant or insane. Possibly both. Can you actually make a settlement work?" "Maybe, if everyone's willing to be creative and flexible. And if they care more about doing something good than winning at all costs," Chen smiled. "Which is asking a lot from lawyers, but stranger things have happened." Sammy looked out the window at Charleston's skyline, thinking about Blackridge 70 miles away, waiting to see if hope would survive or die in a conference room full of attorneys. "Make it work," she said. "Whatever it takes." 3 weeks later they reconvened. Jennifer Chen had worked miracles, shuttling between claimants, proposing and revising, negotiating and cajoling. The settlement agreement she presented was 37 pages long, but Sammy thought of it as a kind of legal poetry, a way of making everyone happy, or at least preventing anyone from being too unhappy. Chen presented it to the assembled group with evident pride. "Here's what we're proposing. The total value of the currency and its collector's worth has been appraised at $6.2 million. After taxes, which we've structured as favorably as possible, we're looking at approximately $3.8 million net." She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. "First, CSX Corporation. We acknowledge your status as successor to the original railway company. In exchange for releasing all claims to the money, you receive 1. A payment of $400,000, roughly equivalent to what the original $50,000 would be worth in today's dollars if simply adjusted for inflation. 2. Naming rights to a new railway museum to be built at the Blackridge station, celebrating the region's railway heritage. 3. A tax deduction for the remainder as a charitable contribution to community development. Patricia Vance studied the proposal. The publicity value alone is worth something. CSX supporting Appalachian community development. That's good press. She made a note. I'll need to run this by the board, but I think they'll go for it. Second, Chen continued, Robert Caldwell, your great-grandfather's losses were real and documented. We're proposing a payment of $75,000 to you personally, with a public acknowledgement of your family's loss in the 1923 robbery. Jim Howell leaned over to confer with his client. Caldwell looked like he might cry. That's more than fair, Howell said. We accept. Third, the state of West Virginia. In exchange for waiving any treasure trove claims, the state receives a commitment that all development funded by this money will prioritize West Virginia contractors and workers, a yearly report on economic impact and job creation, and a payment of $200,000 to the state's general fund. The Assistant Attorney General made notes. I'll need approval from the AG's office, but this addresses our concerns. We're more interested in economic development than in grabbing money from a struggling community. Fourth, the Blackridge Historical Society. You become the administering entity for the Blackridge Community Trust, which will hold and manage the remaining funds. You'll receive $50,000 annually for operations, with the requirement that you maintain the train station as a public historical site and museum. Sarah Preston nodded eagerly. That's exactly what we hoped for. Which brings us to the heart of it, Chen said. Sammy Hemingway and Agnes Pritchard, as the finder and the heir, respectively, you would split $600,000 between you, $300,000 each. The remaining $2.475 million goes into the Blackridge Community Trust to be used for community development as Edgar Pritchard intended. Agnes spoke first. I want my share to go into the trust as well. I don't need the money, and Edgar would want it used for the town. All eyes turned to Sammy. She'd been thinking about this for weeks, lying awake at night in the Blackridge Motor Lodge, walking through the empty station, talking to townspeople. $300,000 was more money than she'd ever imagined having. It could set her up for life, let her pursue her photography without financial worry, but every time she thought about taking it, she remembered Edgar's final ledger entry. She remembered Harold's question, are you going to stay and build something? I'll keep $50,000, she said. Enough to live on for a while, to cover my expenses while I work on this. The rest goes to the trust. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Chen looked at her sharply. Sammy, are you sure? That's $250,000 you're giving up, I'm sure. But I have conditions. Sammy stood, feeling like she should be on her feet for this. I want to be director of the trust. I want to be the one who implements Edgar's vision. And I want to live in the station, renovate part of it into an apartment, while we turn the rest into the museum and community center. Agnes reached over and squeezed her hand. Edgar would be proud, Chen made notes. That brings the trust total to $2,725 million. With careful investment and management, that's enough to fund significant development in Blackridge. But Sammy, being director means committing years of your life to this. You understand that? Sammy thought about her rootless existence, moving from town to town, documenting decay. Maybe it was time to document renewal instead. I understand. The final settlement required approval from the court, but with all claimants in agreement, it was largely a formality. Judge Margaret Holloway, a West Virginia native who'd grown up in a coal town, not unlike Blackridge, reviewed the agreement with obvious satisfaction. It's rare that I see lawyers put aside adversarial positioning for creative problem-solving, she said from the bench. Rarer still to see individuals with legitimate claims choose community benefit over personal gain. This settlement honors the wishes of Edgar Pritchard, addresses the legitimate interests of all parties, and provides meaningful benefit to a struggling Appalachian community. I approve it without reservation. The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. The media coverage was intense, but largely positive. "Woman who found $6 gives most of it away," ran in the Washington Post. "Appalachian town gets second chance," was CNN's angle. Even cynical commentators seemed moved by the story of Edgar's long wait and Sammy's decision to honor his wishes. But the real celebration happened in Blackridge. The town held a community meeting at the old high school gymnasium, the only space big enough to hold everyone who wanted to come. Sammy stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, old-timers who remembered when the trains ran, young families who'd stayed despite the lack of opportunities, people who'd moved away but were now wondering if they could come home. "Edgar Pritchard waited 70 years to do something good with this money," Sammy said. "Let's not waste another day. I want to hear your ideas. What should we build? What does Blackridge need?" The suggestions came fast. A medical clinic, high-speed internet infrastructure, a community center, job training programs, small business grants, renovation of the historic downtown, a playground, housing for seniors, scholarships for students. Sammy wrote them all down, filling page after page. Millie from the diner stood up. "What about starting with the station itself? Make it beautiful again. Show people what's possible. Then use it as a base to do the rest." The crowd murmured agreement. Harold raised his hand. "And a railway museum. Tell the whole story, the glory days, the robbery, Edgar's secret, all of it. Make it a destination. Bring tourists back to Blackridge." Agnes stood, her voice carrying despite her small frame. "My uncle believed in this town. He believed it was worth saving. He waited his whole life for the chance to prove it. We have that chance now. Let's not let him down." The applause started slow and built until it filled the gymnasium. Echoing off the old basketball hoops and faded banners, Sammy felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. She'd spent her adult life documenting beautiful ruins, preserving them in photographs before they disappeared completely. But maybe there was more to preservation than documentation. Maybe sometimes you could actually save the thing you loved. That night, alone in the station, she stood in the tower room where the safe still sat empty. Through the windows, she could see Blackridge spreading below, its lights like scattered stars in the mountain darkness. "I'll make it work, Edgar," she said to the empty room. "I promise." The safe, silent witness to a century of secrets seemed to approve. 6 months into the project, Sammy stood on the platform of Blackridge Station watching contractors work. The building hummed with activity. Workers repairing the roof, replacing rotten wood, carefully restoring the Victorian details that made the structure so magnificent. The safe had been moved to a position of honor in what would become the museum's main gallery. Its door permanently open, a symbol of secrets revealed and promises kept. Its door permanently open, a symbol of secrets revealed and promises kept. The restoration was proceeding faster than expected, partly because Agnes had been right. Using local contractors meant that half the town had a personal stake in the project. Men who'd been out of work for years suddenly had jobs. A generation of Blackridge residents who'd learned trades but had nowhere to use them were now teaching their skills to younger workers. "Ms. Hemingway?" A young man approached, hard hat in hand. "We found something in the wall cavity on the second floor. Thought you should see it before we patch it up." Sammy followed him inside and up the stairs. Workers had removed a section of plaster, exposing the brick and timber bones of the building. There, wedged between 2 studs, was a small leather satchel. Her heart raced as she carefully extracted it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Edgar Pritchard, all unopened. The return addresses were from all over the country, dated from 1924 to 1953. That evening, Sammy sat in her newly renovated apartment, a cozy space carved out of the station's east wing, and read through the letters. They were from other railway workers, From people Edgar had met during his years at the station, from distant cousins and old war buddies. Most were ordinary correspondents, but a few stood out. One, dated 1947, was from Jerome Whitmore, the banker friend who'd helped Edgar invest the money. "Edgar, you stubborn old fool. The statute of limitations expired 3 years ago. You can claim the money now. Stop waiting for some perfect moment that's never going to come. Use it, do the good you've always talked about. I'll be dead before you get around to it at this rate." Another, from 1952, was from a lawyer in Charleston. "Mr. Pritchard, I've reviewed your case as requested. My professional opinion is that you have clear legal standing to claim the funds. The original theft statutes have expired, and your management of the money over the years has actually increased its value substantially. I urge you to begin the process of formal claim before age makes it impossible." But Edgar hadn't acted. Why? Sammy reread his diary entries looking for clues. And there, in an entry from early 1954, just months before his death, she found the answer. Whitmore says, "I'm a fool for waiting." Perhaps I am. But I've spent 30 years keeping this secret, and I find I cannot bring myself to reveal it. The money has become like a living thing to me, a companion in my solitude. What happens when I finally use it? When the secret is told and the money spent? What purpose will I have then? Better to wait, to plan, to dream of the good it will do someday. The waiting has become its own kind of purpose. Sammy felt a deep sadness reading those words. Edgar hadn't been waiting for legal clearance or the perfect moment. He'd been afraid that achieving his dream would leave him with nothing to live for. And so he'd waited too long, and death had found him with his purpose unfulfilled. She wouldn't make that mistake. The next morning, she convened the Blackridge Community Trust Board. Along with Agnes and herself, the board now included Harold Cummings, Millie, Sarah Preston from the Historical Society, and 3 other community members representing different constituencies. The business owners, the young families, and the seniors. "We need to start making decisions," Sammy said. "The station restoration is going well, but that's just the beginning. We have to decide what comes next." They spent 6 hours hammering out a 5-year plan. The station would become a combination railway museum, community center, and business incubator. The museum would tell Blackridge's story, the boom years, the decline, Edgar's secret, the rediscovery. The community center would offer space for meetings, events, and programs. The business incubator would provide small grants and free space for entrepreneurs trying to start businesses in Blackridge. But they needed something else, something that would bring sustainable economic activity. Harold had the answer. "The trail," he said, unrolling a map. "The old railway line. Most of it's still there, just overgrown. We could turn it into a rail trail, biking, hiking, connect it to the Greenbrier River Trail 40 miles north. Suddenly, Blackridge becomes a destination on a 100-mile trail system." The idea caught fire. A rail trail meant cyclists and hikers, which meant restaurants and shops and bed and breakfasts. It meant a reason for people to stop in Blackridge instead of driving past it on their way to somewhere else. "It'll cost money we don't have," Millie pointed out. "Not as much as you'd think," Sarah said. "There are federal grants for trail development, especially in economically distressed areas. And if we can show we've already invested trust money into the station restoration, we're more likely to get matched funding." They voted unanimously to pursue it. Over the next year, Sammy learned skills she'd never expected to need. She wrote grant applications, negotiated with government agencies, gave presentations to potential donors. She learned about historical preservation, non-profit management, community organizing. Her photography took a back seat, though she still documented everything: the station's transformation, the faces of workers, the slow greening of the rail trail as volunteers cleared the old right-of-way. The station reopened 18 months after the settlement was finalized. The event drew visitors from across the state. Jennifer Chen came, along with Patricia Vance from CSX and even Robert Caldwell. who gave a moving speech about his great-grandfather's lost fortune and Edgar's redemption of it. But the real moment came when they unveiled the museum's centerpiece, the safe, with all the ledgers and letters displayed around it, telling the full story of Edgar Pritchard's long wait and Sammy's 50-cent gamble. Agnes cut the ribbon, tears streaming down her face. "Uncle Edgar," she said to the sky, "we did it. We built something. The museum was beautiful, the community center was already booked solid with events, and 3 small businesses had moved into the incubator spaces. The rail trail was still under construction, but the first 5 miles were open and attracting weekend cyclists from Charleston and beyond. Blackridge, for the first time in 60 years, was growing, but Sammy's work was far from over. As she locked up the station that night, she looked at the list of projects still pending: housing renovation, internet infrastructure, the medical clinic, scholarships. So much still to do, so many promises to keep. Edgar had waited 70 years. She had the rest of her life. She was going to make every day count. 5 years after buying the Blackridge station for 50 cents, Sammy Hemingway stood in the tower room, where it all began, and looked out over a town transformed. The main street, once a row of empty storefronts, now bustled with activity. She could see the new coffee shop, the craft brewery, the outdoor outfitter that rented bikes and camping gear. The rail trail had been completed 3 years ago, connecting Blackridge to a regional network that drew thousands of visitors every year. On summer weekends, cyclists crowded the town, spending money at local businesses, staying at the bed and breakfasts that had sprung up in renovated Victorian homes. The medical clinic opened its doors every morning, serving not just Blackridge but 3 neighboring communities. The high-speed internet infrastructure had enabled remote workers to move to town, drawn by affordable housing and mountain beauty. The population of Blackridge had grown to 1,200, not massive growth, but the first time the number had gone up instead of down in 60 years. But the statistics didn't capture what mattered most. What mattered was the young mother who told Sammy that her daughter could now see a doctor without driving 2 hours. The teenager who'd received a scholarship to college, the first in his family to go. The grandfather who'd found work as a trail guide after a decade of unemployment. The sense, fragile but growing, that Blackridge had a future. Sammy herself had changed too. At 37, she'd become something she never expected: a community leader. She still took photographs. The station walls were lined with her images of Blackridge's transformation, but photography was no longer her primary identity. She'd become the keeper of Edgar's legacy, the guardian of his dream. "Sammy!" Agnes's voice came from the stairs. At 92, she still climbed them, though more slowly now. "You have visitors." The visitors were a film crew from PBS, doing a documentary about Appalachian renewal. They'd already interviewed dozens of townspeople. Now they wanted Sammy's story. She took them through the museum, showing them the safe, the ledgers, the photographs of Edgar, and the station in its various incarnations. She told them about the 50-cent auction, the discovery, the settlement. "But why did you give up so much of the money?" the interviewer asked, the question everyone wanted answered. "You could have been rich." Sammy had answered this question 100 times, but she still had to think about her response. "I am rich," she said finally. "Just not in the way you mean." Edgar Pritchard spent 70 years waiting to do something good, and he died before he could do it. "I wasn't going to make the same mistake. The money was never really mine. It was a trust passed down through time from Edgar to me. My job was just to use it the way he intended. And do you think you have?" Sammy looked around the museum, at the photographs of ribbon cuttings and trail openings, at the faces of people whose lives had changed. "I think Edgar would be satisfied. But the work isn't done. It's never done. Community building isn't a project with an end date. It's a commitment." After the interview, Sammy found Agnes sitting on one of the restored benches in the waiting room. The same benches where travelers had waited for trains a century ago. "You know what I've been thinking about," Agnes said. "That safe combination. The numbers were from Edgar's life, his age when he started, his badge number, the year the station was built. He literally made himself the key to the secret. Maybe that's why he could never bring himself to share it, Sammy said, sitting beside her. Opening the safe meant revealing himself. But you did it, Agnes said. You opened the safe, revealed the secret, and used it to build something. You did what he couldn't. We did, Sammy corrected. You, me, the whole town. It was never about one person. Agnes pulled an envelope from her purse. I'm 92 years old, Sammy. I need to think about the future. I've updated my will. Everything I have goes to the Blackridge Community Trust when I die. It's not much, maybe 50,000, but it should help. Agnes, you don't have to. Hush, I want to. And I want you to promise me something. Agnes's eyes, still sharp despite her age, fixed on Sammy's. Promise me you'll find someone to pass this to. Someone younger, who can carry it forward when you can't. Don't do what Edgar did and hold on too long. Sammy felt her throat tighten. I promise. Agnes Pritchard passed away peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in November. The entire town shut down for her funeral. People came from 3 counties away, filling the small Baptist church to capacity and spilling out onto the lawn. Sammy gave the eulogy, her voice breaking as she described the tiny woman who'd remembered a combination from childhood and used it to unlock not just a safe, but a town's future. They buried Agnes in the Blackridge cemetery on a hillside overlooking the station. Her headstone, simple and elegant, read, Agnes Pritchard, 1933-2025, she remembered. Below that, at Sammy's request, they'd added, beloved niece of Edgar Pritchard. Together, they kept their promises. The reading of Agnes's will revealed more surprises. Beyond the 50,000 she'd mentioned, Agnes had been quietly selling off family property and possessions over the past year. The total bequest to the Blackridge Community Trust was $287,000, but there was something else. A letter addressed to Sammy, to be opened privately. That evening, alone in her apartment at the station, Sammy broke the seal. My dear Sammy, if you're reading this, I've gone to join Edgar and the rest of my family. I hope I lived long enough to see the orchard bloom. We planted those apple trees last spring, and I so wanted to taste the fruit. I've watched you these past 5 years, and I've seen something remarkable. You came to Blackridge as a stranger with a camera, looking for beautiful ruins. You stayed as a builder, creating beautiful futures. That transformation, from documenter of decay to architect of renewal, is perhaps the greatest treasure that came from Edgar's safe. But I worry about you, dear. You work too hard. You give too much. You're so focused on honoring Edgar's legacy that you might make his same mistake, letting the work consume you until there's nothing else left. So I'm going to tell you something I never told anyone, not even Edgar when he was alive. I knew about the money. Not all the details, but I knew he had a secret, knew he was hiding something in that safe. When I was 7 years old, I snuck into the tower room one day when he wasn't looking. I saw him standing in front of the safe, just staring at it, and there were tears running down his face. Uncle Edgar, I asked, why are you crying? He didn't get angry at me for being there. He just picked me up and held me, and he said, because I'm afraid, Aggie. I'm afraid that when I finally do what I'm meant to do, I won't know who I am anymore. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Edgar defined himself by his secret, by his waiting, by his unfulfilled purpose. And when the time came to actually fulfill it, he couldn't. He'd waited so long that the waiting had become his identity. Don't let that happen to you, Sammy. You've done beautiful work here. You've honored Edgar better than he could have honored himself. But don't let Blackridge become your cage, the way that safe became Edgar's. Live your life. Fall in love, travel, take photographs just for the joy of it, not to document community progress. The trust will survive without you at the helm every single day. And when the time comes, and you'll know when it is, pass the torch to someone else. You asked me once what I thought Edgar would have done with the money if he'd lived long enough to use it. I think he would have done exactly what you've done. But I also think he would have wanted better for you than he had for himself. He would have wanted you to find joy, not just purpose. Thank you for giving an old woman the chance to see her uncle's dream come true. Thank you for bringing Blackridge back to life. Thank you for being brave enough to open what Edgar kept closed. Now be brave enough to live. With love and gratitude, Agnes Sammy read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the museum's archive, next to Edgar's final ledger entry. 2 voices across a century, both telling her the same thing. Don't wait too long to live. The Blackridge Community Trust held a special board meeting to discuss succession planning. Sammy had announced her intention to step down as director within a year, transitioning to an advisory role. Are you sure about this? Harold asked. He was 96 now, attending meetings via video call from the nursing home in Charleston, where he'd moved after a fall. You're only 38. You could do this for decades. That's exactly why I need to step back, Sammy said. I've spent 5.5 years doing this job. It's time for someone with fresh eyes and new energy. Someone who lives here, who has roots here, who understands Blackridge in ways I never will. The board had already identified a candidate, Maya Thornton, a 31-year-old Blackridge native who'd left for college and a career in non-profit management in D.C., but had recently moved back with her husband and 2 kids. She'd grown up in Blackridge, had watched the town die, and wanted to be part of its resurrection. Maya knows this community, Sammy continued. She knows the families, the history, the feuds and friendships that go back generations. She's better equipped to lead the next phase than I am. Millie, still running the diner at 76, spoke up. What will you do? I'm going to travel, Sammy said, and saying it out loud made it feel real, exciting. I'm going to take photographs again, really take them. Document other places, other stories. There are dozens of towns like Blackridge across Appalachia, places that could use what we've learned here. I want to share that knowledge. Write a book maybe, consult, but also, she paused, smiling, I want to just be a photographer again sometimes. No agenda, no community benefit analysis, just beauty for its own sake. The board voted unanimously to begin the transition process 1 year later. The change of leadership ceremony was held at the station on a brilliant October day, almost exactly 7 years after Sammy had bought the building for 50 cents. The waiting room was packed with people, townspeople, regional officials, representatives from the dozens of communities that had modeled programs after Blackridge's success. Maya Thornton stood beside Sammy at the podium, looking nervous and excited. They'd spent the past year working together, Maya learning the intricacies of grant management and community organizing, Sammy gradually letting go of the daily decisions she'd controlled for so long. When I came back to Blackridge 2 years ago, Maya said in her speech, I thought I was coming home to a dying town. Instead, I found a town being reborn. That rebirth didn't happen by accident. It happened because of one woman who was willing to take a crazy risk on a 50-cent building. And because she understood that real treasure isn't money, it's what you build with it. She turned to Sammy. You gave this town a second chance. Now let us give you one. A chance to live your own life, chase your own dreams, with our gratitude and blessing. Sammy felt tears threatening, but held them back. She'd cried enough over the past 7 years. I'm not leaving, she said. Blackridge is my home now. The station apartment is still mine, one of the perks of being the founder. I'll still be here, still involved, just not running everything. Maya will do that, and she'll do it better than I could. After the ceremony, people gathered for the annual celebration. But this year felt different. There was a sense of completion, of one chapter ending and another beginning. Sammy found herself standing by the safe in the museum, staring at its empty interior as she'd done countless times. A man approached, mid-40s, kind eyes, camera bag over his shoulder. Miss Hemingway? I'm Derek Lawson. I'm a photographer, documentary work mainly. I've been following the Blackridge story for years. Your photographs of the transformation are extraordinary. Thank you, Sammy said, genuinely pleased. She'd won several awards for her Blackridge series, but praise from fellow photographers always meant more. I'm working on a project about rail trails across Appalachia, Derek continued. The social and economic impact, the way they're connecting communities. I was hoping you might have some advice, or... He hesitated. Maybe you'd want to collaborate? I saw you're stepping down from the trust. If you're looking for a new project... Sammy looked at him, really looked. Saw the passion for the work in his eyes, the nervous hope in his expression. Felt something stir that she hadn't felt in years. Possibility, connection, the chance for something beyond Blackridge. I might be interested, she said. Tell me more about your project. They talked for 2 hours, sitting on the platform where a century ago travelers had waited for trains to carry them away. They talked about photography and community development, about Appalachia's past and future, about the stories that needed telling. And somewhere in that conversation, Sammy felt the last piece of Edgar's ghost release its hold on her. She'd done what he couldn't. She'd opened the safe, used the treasure, built something lasting. She'd honored his wishes and exceeded his dreams. And now, finally, she could let herself move forward into her own story. Sammy returned to Blackridge on a crisp October morning, the anniversary of her original 50-cent purchase. She was 43 now, tanned from a summer spent photographing rail trails in Virginia and Kentucky. The back seat of her car was full of equipment and notebooks, research for the book she and Derek were writing together. Derek, her partner in work and life now. They'd gotten married 2 years ago in a small ceremony at the station, with the whole town in attendance. They split their time between Blackridge and the road, documenting Appalachian renewal projects, consulting with communities, taking photographs that told stories of hope and resurrection. The station looked magnificent in the morning light. Maya had expanded the museum, adding a whole wing dedicated to regional railway history. The community center hosted 3 different programs daily. The business incubator had graduated 27 startups, 13 of which were still operating successfully. Blackridge's population had reached 1,500. There was talk of opening an elementary school. The old one had closed 30 years ago, forcing families to bus kids to the next town over. The trust was reviewing the proposal. Sammy walked through the museum, nodding to the docent, a teenager earning college money through the trust's youth employment program. The safe stood in its place of honor, spotlit, its door forever open. Someone had placed fresh flowers in front of it, as they did every October. In the tower room, Sammy found what she'd come looking for, the guest book she'd started 7 years ago. Visitors from around the world had signed it, people inspired by the story, researchers studying rural development, photographers documenting the station's beauty. She added her own entry, October 11th, 2036. 12 years since I bought this place for 50 cents. Sometimes I still can't believe it happened, that a random auction led to all of this. But I've learned that the best things in life often come from the smallest decisions, the cheapest investments, the moments when we say yes without knowing where it will lead. Edgar waited 70 years to do good. I'm grateful I only had to wait 7 years to learn that doing good doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. You can honor someone's legacy while still living your own life. To anyone reading this, if you find treasure, don't hoard it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Use it, share it, build something. And then, when the building is done, let yourself rest. Let yourself live. Let someone else carry the torch forward. The safe is empty, but the station is full. That's how it should be. Sammy Hemingway. She closed the book and stood at the window, looking out over Blackridge. Maya was down there somewhere, probably in a board meeting or reviewing grant applications. Harold had passed away 2 years ago at 98, sharp until the end. Millie still ran the diner, now with her granddaughter as partner. The town lived on, changed, but enduring. Sammy's phone buzzed. Derek, where are you? The presentation starts in an hour. Right, she'd almost forgotten. They were giving a talk at the community center about their book, Rails to Renewal, How Abandoned Lines Are Rebuilding Appalachia. The book had just been published, and early reviews were strong. She took one last look at the safe, that beautiful, empty Victorian safe that had held so many secrets, so much money, so many dreams. Then she headed downstairs, out into the October sunshine, toward whatever came next. Behind her, the station stood solid and proud, its copper cupola gleaming green against the blue sky. Inside, visitors wandered through the museum, reading Edgar's story, learning about Blackridge's resurrection. Children played in the community center. Entrepreneurs worked in the incubator spaces. The safe sat empty, but not forgotten. Its door open wide, inviting people to look inside and see that the real treasure had never been the money at all. It had been the possibility, the promise, the potential for transformation that lives in all of us, if we're brave enough to take the risk, wise enough to share the reward, and strong enough to build something that will outlast us. Sammy Hemingway had bought an abandoned train station for 50 cents. She'd found $6 million in a safe. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.